Sally, thanks ever so much, and welcome everybody. It's probably a bit too late to wish everybody a happy new year, but we are still in January, but we're really looking forward to this session this afternoon on Living Well with 13 Group. We're delighted to be joined by three excellent speakers from 13 Group. I shall introduce them shortly. For those of you who can just remember back to last month, we held a very successful summit. We were delighted at that summit to also have been joined by Chris Smith, who shared some of her insights in the work of 13 in relation to leadership. We're following on that today to look at Living Well as our first happy hour of 2022. And some of you may have observed we've slightly changed the branding and created a nice new blue backdrop, and it's something that we're going to develop during the year, and we look forward to sharing a little bit more about that as we go along this spring. But as I said, this is the first happy hour of 2022, and we're focusing on 13 Group's approach to Living Well. And I know that the team have been working really hard behind the scenes to develop this strategy and plan, and working closely about what it means, in particular for customers as well. And we're going to hear from three key people from the group: Chris Smith, Executive Director of Business Growth. We're going to hear followed by Jane Lawson, Head of Innovation and Marketing, and then followed by Michelle Dawson, Innovation Manager. He's going to talk about the next steps in relation to service design and customer insights. We've got a lot to cover, and rather than hearing me talk for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to pass immediately over to Chris. Chris, welcome, and thanks ever so much for 13 Group's support of the LIN.
Thanks, Jeremy. And my colleague Jane is going to share the presentation that we're just going to share as we go through today. And it's great to be back, and it's great to have so many people on the call tonight. So hopefully you'll get a lot out of it and ask lots of questions. I'm just going to really talk about the context and the background to this, and I'll leave it to Jane and Michelle to talk about the detail, because I'm sure that's what people are more interested in. So just on the first slide, Jane, on the kind of a national approach, and I don't really need to tell this group, this audience, about the ageing population that we have. So in 26 years' time, 1 in 4 people in England will be 65 or over. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that people will need care, support, or be in ill health. But I think what it will mean is that they will require more choices around their housing and support options, and really be looking to a different kind of offer that's there currently. So it's really opportune time to be thinking about this in terms of the future, and really asking ourselves, what are the key questions housing providers should be asking now to plan for that future and to promote that choice and diversity in the market? What are the new models of accommodation, such as intergenerational housing or co-housing, that might attract people to a different way of life, because they might have different perspectives and different priorities? So what might that look like? And critically, and I don't think we're going to solve this one today, but who pays for all of that? How is care, support, that kind of independent living paid for in the future, and what might that look like? But equally, I think, and certainly from 13's point of view, how can early interventions allow people to remain independent for as long as possible in their own homes? So in terms of the next slide, Jane, in terms of 13, as an organisation, we are a housing association. We are based in the North East, and we work across the North West and North Yorkshire. But within that kind of span of geography that we work in, we've got a very, very different demographic and a needs profile within our customers. So if we look at Teesside in the northeast, we've still got that legacy of heavy industry and associated long-term health conditions. We also work in some of the most deprived communities in the country, and we all know that in areas of high deprivation, we also see poorer health outcomes. So these conditions will place even more pressure on public services, and that's not always equally compensated in terms of national or regional funding for those kinds of conditions. So, we've got to look at that context as we are developing stuff. I think housing is a massive part of finding good solutions for these issues, and it can often be the glue in communities which allow people to remain independent for longer. So for 13, we've got a long history, a long track record that we're really proud of in delivering specialist and supported accommodation and housing for a range of different customers. We do a lot with older people, but we also work with people with learning difficulties, autism, mental health issues, people with physical conditions, and those just requiring support around remaining or retaining their independence. So a whole range of services that we either provide in settings or in general needs accommodation. And we've developed a lot of different models over the years, and as I said, really proud of what we do. But around 10% of our 35,000 homes could be classed as specialist or supported accommodation. But the vast majority of that, of the accommodation we have, is general needs. And 30% of our residents aged 65 and over live in our general needs accommodation. So we've already got a mismatch of property against age, range and needs. But, you know, we're not going to build ourselves out of that problem in the next 20 odd years. So we've got to look at more creative ways of dealing with those issues. We do recognise that people in our communities need that extra help and care and support. So we do provide a lot of services just at hand to help support people live in their own accommodation. So that might be around doing small adaptations. We do a lot of work ourselves. We don't really call on local authorities to do that work. We offer benefits and money advice, tenancy support, signposting to other agencies for help and support, and do a lot around safeguarding. So we're really active in that field. And we've created some great partnerships with local authorities, health trusts, the voluntary sector and so forth. And we want to do more of this. We feel as if it's a part of the big business that we want to grow. And it's a part of business, as I said, that we are rightly proud of. And we all know that it can be a much more cost-effective solution when you provide solutions for people in their own home. So it might cost around £3,000 to £4,000 per week in a hospital bed for somebody. If they are living in an extra care scheme, for example, you're talking with the rent, the service charge and the care and support, probably less than £500 a week. So you know, the cost alone is really stark in terms of the difference. But apart from the economics, for us, it's about that life enhancing solutions that we can bring in those services that can help people live in that community and become and remain independent for longer. So it's very much part of our social purpose. And at last, the timing's never been as good for this agenda. I mean, we've been talking about it for years, and I know, Jeremy, you've been banging the drum for a number of years around how housing can be part of that overall health solution, and how housing can be more integrated with health and social care. And at last, with the recent publication of the Adult Social Care White Paper, it actually says that in black and white, that every decision about care should be a decision about housing. Hallelujah. And you know, there's a lot of money being identified to help support this this journey, because it is a long-term vision that the government's got. It needs to be, and there's a lot more to do around care, integration, you know, care and support, and the National Health Service, etc. There's a lot more to do, but I feel as if it's now the start. We're pushing on an open door here. But I think it's incumbent on us as professionals, as lobbyists, as people who are part of the solution, to really develop the business case and work with our care and National Health colleagues around how we can help them with that, because we all speak a different language, we all have different priorities, but for once we can have a kind of a combined vision and a combined agenda about how we can do more to help people become, remain and retain their independence. So I think it's a really opportune time, and what I really want to do now is just to hand over to Jane in the first instance to really talk a little bit more about our vision and then how about we've taken that forward. So over to you, Jane.
Thanks, Chris. I don't have the luxury of a clicker who will click me through my slides, so I've got to multitask now. So hopefully you can all still see that. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about our approach really at 13 and how we've tackled this. Chris has kind of laid out quite nicely there some of the landscape, but lots of you on this will be aware of the landscape already. And it's what can you get out of this session really that you could take away. So our approach has been we took a look at this project, and when I first started looking at it, I did probably what a lot of people on this call would do, and I set up a standard project group and spent lots of time talking to people across our organisation. So I was talking to various people such as our architects, people involved in the design of our properties, our operational teams in terms of the services that we deliver, and our policy and research team. And we just really quickly realised how vast it is, even in terms of research. The amount of varying research out there that tells you different things was huge. So we needed to think about how we frame it. We talked about how we design houses. We talked about community facilities and technology, what other people are doing in this space. And then Michelle joined us, who will speak after me. Michelle joined us back in April last year. And she took a look at this, and we decided to take a step back and try and reframe it in terms of what is it that we're actually trying to achieve, because as you'll have seen from our vision there, it is massive. And we came up with these imagine if statements, and this is kind of the ideal. This is where we want to be as an organisation, both for the business and for our customers. So I'm not going to read through those because you can see them in front of you on the screen. But if you think about, so for example, imagine if 13 offered a choice of housing that older people aspired to move into. When we were talking about that, we're talking about, you know, a lot of our customers naturally will have gone through various life stages and be living in a home that they want to remain in, but may not be able to. Our kind of first target here is that we would help people to remain living independent in their own home for as long as possible. But after that, if they do then need to move into more supported accommodation, we want it to be something people aspire to. So it doesn't feel like a forced move or a stage in their life that they have to move into a different type of accommodation, but that the accommodation we're able to provide is aspirational. And again, if you think about things like technology, that's a huge scope. It's a very broad word and we throw it around quite a lot. And yes, we're absolutely talking about things like assistive technology and how we prevent falls, but we're also thinking about some of the more basic things. How do people search for a property? How do they understand how to, you know, how can they report a repair or track their repair and do these things in a more digital era? And some of our customers now won't want that, but we're talking about our current service offering and how we future-proof this. So in 10, 20 years time, is it going to be the norm that those services are available, and how do we make sure that they are available for our customers? So there was so many questions, as you can imagine. And what we've got, the pictures here are actually what we term a squid, which Michelle brought to the organisation. That was just before Squid Games, so there's nothing sinister about it. It's purely how it ends up getting laid out on the wall. But we took our imagine if statements, and then what are the questions that we need to ask? Where can we find them? Who do we need to speak to? And this formed for us basically our plan of action. And we needed to go and speak to professionals. We needed to speak to customers. We needed to speak to our frontline delivery staff. And we didn't make any assumptions. So, for example, you might think that we know what our current service offer is, and absolutely on paper we do, but how does that operate in practice? So rather than assuming that it works, we needed to speak to those practitioners that are delivering that. We needed to speak to our customers and our colleagues and just understand in practice how we need to approach some areas of this project. So we did lots of research, and that's what the discovery phase essentially is. It's lots of research, but in the way that we framed it, we managed to hone down that research and really target the areas that we wanted to know about, rather than looking at the vast array of things that are already available. The research confirmed some things that we thought that we knew, and it gave us some new levels of insight into other things. So, for example, Chris has already mentioned one of our biggest operating areas is within the Northeast. And within those operating areas, people aren't as affluent as some other areas of the UK. So we're not designing for the ideal world. We might have an ideal solution, but that's not necessarily always going to work. We know that issues like dementia and hearing loss and falls are going to increase. So what can we do to better support our customers through that? And we also needed to frame this in that this isn't just something for 13 to solve on our own. There's definitely things we can solve. There's operational things that we can look at, but we are one organisation, and the things that we can do are limited. And so we need to plough on with the things that we can do. And then we need to collaborate. There's things that we can collaborate on. Who can we work with? Where can we press forward with things in terms of kind of co-designing with other people, and also what are the things that we can influence. So how can we use the research and the information and the things our customers are telling us to influence the things on a more national scale. And so, as I said, that was the discovery phase. Michelle and her team spoke to colleagues in the NHS, in social care, some national and local experts. We spoke to people in our supported living schemes, and that concluded in an exhibition. And that exhibition took place in our head office at Hudson Quay, and that was a group of colleagues and some involved customers who went around and looked at the work that the team had done so far. And they looked at the personas, which I won't go into a lot of detail about because I think Michelle's going to talk about that. And they looked at how we can prioritise some of this stuff going forward, which things surprised them, which things as a business would they take forward in terms of the opportunities and gaps, and which things, if you were looking at it from more of a customer perspective, so if you were thinking about yourself as you got older, or your parents or your grandparents, which things would you prioritise? And that gave us some really useful information to move forward with. And basically the discovery phase told us it gave us some quite interesting insight. So it's not about age. We should be designing approaches around vulnerability and not age. When we talk about helping our customers to live well for longer, we're talking about the vulnerability and not specifically designing services around age. So, for example, we're supporting people in the 80s and 90s that have low levels of need, and we're supporting people in their 50s and 60s that have high levels of need. And we need to reframe that and tailor the conversation around the needs and the support that customer requires, rather than focusing it on their age. Chris mentioned multi-generational and intergenerational housing and close to town centres, which is really kind of key in terms of timing as well, because lots of local authorities are looking at how they can regenerate their town centres. And that's a big driver for people when they want to move into more appropriate accommodation for their needs, is that they want to be close to shops, they want to be close to activity, and they want to be close to green space. So how can we work with local authorities to influence that in terms of their town centre, and how accommodation is designed there for a range of generations and for vulnerable customers? That people living in their own home, and this is a really difficult one to crack, I think, especially when you're talking about customers that have maybe lived in their own home in their community for most of their life. They would rather stay in that community, even if it means staying in a property that isn't appropriate for their needs. So that's a really difficult nut to crack. We need to do more to prevent people falling over. We know that falls cost a lot of money. How do we intervene at an earlier stage? And also, how do we better understand and support people that are living with dementia? As I've mentioned, especially within the North East, that's increasing. And underpinning all of this, which probably isn't a surprise to anybody, was the need for better data about our customers that will enable us to provide advice and support when their lives are changing, and exploring how technology can play a part in solving some of the problems that we've identified. And that kind of play a part is really key, because it's not the be all and end all. Again, I don't want to steal Michelle's thunder, so I won't talk too much about that either, because I know that she's going to talk about technology. So what is Living Well? It is an overarching programme of work. So Michelle's here from the innovation team, and there is definitely some areas of growth and opportunities there for us as a business, and for us to improve things for our customers in the future. But the programme itself is not an innovation project. It's an overarching programme of work that cuts right across the organisation, with different areas, the business leading different pieces of work. So there may be the operational things that we can do, some smaller, quicker fixes, and then some bigger elements of service design. There's some things sitting with our investment team. There may be things that come out around repairs. So all of those pieces of work will be owned by those departments, but we'll have this strategic overarching programme of work that makes sure that these things are getting tackled, and that we are looking at the opportunities for growth while still managing our services to the best of our ability and for the best for our customers. So on that note, I am going to hand over to Michelle, who's going to talk to us about next steps and co-design.
Thanks, Jane. I think we're a little bit ahead of time, which is good news for me, because that means I get to talk absolutely loads about all of this really interesting stuff. So my job is to structure, facilitate and manage a process of what is abstractly called innovation, but actually is a way of providing structure to change, redesign and improve things that in the case of Living Well are just quite massive. So a lot around what Jane and Chris have talked about is how do we actually break this down and make an actual real difference to people. That's evidence-based and based on our actual learning and insight rather than the things that we assume to be true. So we did all of that work, and the Living Well exhibition was very participatory. So we had lots of gaps, opportunities and problems that were identified through all of our discovery phase that people were able to think about and prioritise. Everyone had a whole load of sticky dots, prioritise the things from their perspective that they felt were the most important. And some of the key work strands that came up were pretty, I know you could probably have predicted them from the beginning, but it was really great to go out and actually test those assumptions and realise that all of the evidence that exists around people living well for longer is still really relevant to our customers. So there are absolutely loads of kind of key work strands that came out, things to do with supporting customers to live well with dementia, a lot to do with the digital divide, which in Teesside is a particular issue that impacts in lots of different ways on parts of our community. And how is that impacting our customers being able to live well for longer? Again, that in itself is a huge design question. So quite a lot of these work strands are phrased as questions because sometimes that's the easiest way to consider them as a design question rather than as a project statement. And these in themselves, you know, are really tough, difficult and complex issues. We were very aware that we did go out and speak to customers to specifically get the answers to the questions that were linked to our imaginative statements. But we didn't speak to customers whose voices would be seldom heard. So if there were people in sheltered and extra care accommodation who didn't leave their rooms, we didn't speak to them, not because we didn't want to, but because there was a lot of COVID regulations and because we had time limitations. We didn't speak to customers who were underrepresented in our schemes or in our properties, because again, that's a design question in itself. How do you engage older people from communities that are not white British in Teesside is another 6-month project, but we are aware that there are voices missing from our research, and one of the things we want to be able to do is go and understand those people's experiences. And key things around exploring the growth of assisted technology and digital services. Next, Jane. Working more closely with health and social care. If you've been working in this kind of, I haven't worked in housing very long, only for like 9 months, but prior to that, my whole career is in social care. And I think if you don't mention working more closely with health and social care in an online event or a face-to-face event, have you really attended one? Because it's literally it comes up in every single, it's the solution to everyone's problems, isn't it? If we could just integrate better, if we could just work more closely together, what are the opportunities for us to collaborate? Possibility and feasibility of handyman service. So interestingly, when this kept coming up over and over again in our research, but through everyone, this is really important to people. This is really important to people. And our external research as well with third sector partners and social workers, people need support to put up shelves and change light bulbs and replace toilet seats and look after their gardens and put the television on the wall, like retune the telly, learn how, like loads of different bits. And then the white paper came out where there's specific resource for national handyman services, and it came out like a few weeks after we put this up on the wall as a priority, and I did feel proud that was aligned with our learning, that actually this issue around people's kind of what could be classed as small everyday problems that can make such a powerful difference if you can help someone solve them. And that's what our learning came up over and over again. Actually, some of these difficulties that people are having that are preventing them from living well are really small things, but things like who should pay for handyman services for people as they become more vulnerable is a question that is a very tricky one to answer, especially locally. We have lots of work to do around data, as Jane has alluded to, understanding who our customers are and the lives that they're living and the difficulties that they're facing, and not just their difficulties, but the strengths that they have, the opportunities that they want to give back, the kind of experiences that they've had in their lives, the opportunity to volunteer, to to gain employment and to engage in meaningful activity, also really important. So it's not just about a deficit-based approach. So my background is in service design. So I'm a little bit, anyone who's chatted to me will know I'm a little bit obsessed with building and designing everything from a customer perspective. And what that means really is gathering real life day-to-day insight that's authentic, that's from people with lived experience, who are day-to-day living in our properties, who are growing older, who are able to offer really valuable insight. And service design offers a kind of structure that enables you to collaboratively work with a bunch of stakeholders, including customers, together, so that you can make decisions and redesign or design new things based on the everyday needs, wants, and things that are actually useful to people in real life. So it's a very accessible way of working because it brings a level of equality to the equation. So Jane's opinion, Chris's opinion is no more valuable than Mavis in sheltered care, because they're all in the same activity and their dots all count for the same amount. And that makes it a really equal process that enables things that are really priorities or good ideas to make their way through the process without that being biased by any one person's perspective. It's a roadmap that keeps stakeholders really safe, because often when you start to tackle these really big questions, and there are other big projects going on in the organisation, there's a lot of anxiousness about how big it is and whether we'll be able to move it forwards. And it uses real life insights that facilitate and drive the creative process. So what service design does, it prevents you saying, here's a problem, here's a list of existing solutions, which ones should we choose? It goes, actually, here's a problem, let's go understand it in lots and lots of depth. And actually the solutions may not be something that already exists, because we're going to see the problem from a different perspective. And it absolutely requires lots and lots of hard work at the beginning to engage people with lived experience. So my experience, not necessarily so far in this organisation, but my experience in generally, and especially in big organisations, you have a problem and then someone goes, I've got a solution. And then they implement it. Often the solution is a new software product. That might sound familiar if you work in these big organisations. What service design does and what the innovation team does is actually facilitate the bit between the problem and the solution, and that looks like getting to the root of the problem. And that, you know, there's a role to play for really good data, evidence, and best practice, but actually it's about collaboration with stakeholders, people with lived experience, including frontline staff, including the people who are delivering, who have contact with customers every single day. You know, researching how other people have solved a problem, designing, prototyping and testing solutions, but hopefully bringing the people that you spoke to at the beginning on that journey with you, so that isn't, you don't just gather all their insight and go, thanks very much, but actually there are opportunities for people to stay involved, especially if they have a really good, meaningful experience of connecting with you or with your activity that gathers their insight. This is the Jetson family. I'm quite old. This was on the telly when I was a kid. When people hear innovation, or they hear design, or they hear future proofing design and all of those really buzzy words, this is what people imagine that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. And what I would say about living well is the people, the humans sat in the spaceship, or the people in communities growing older. What works to support people to grow older hasn't changed. It hasn't ever changed for human beings, and I don't see that changing, at least in my lifetime. The evidence suggests that people need to be engaged with meaningful activity. They need connection with other humans. They need to feel safe in their homes and in their communities. They need access to green spaces and transport, and good access to health and social care services. Now, none of those things are to do with spaceships and Alexa and things that fly, zap, buzz. They're all to do with us as human beings and how we behave and how we connect with each other and our preferences. And they also rely on a whole world of life that someone has lived that influences the way that they grow older and the decisions that they make. So when I talk about working in innovation, I think people assume I'm like building the home for the Jetsons, but we're definitely not actually. What I'm doing is looking at Mavis, who's on your screen now, whose biggest issue was the fact that she needed to empty her kitchen in order to get a new kitchen. And because, you know, lack of handyman services, and we have customer liaison support that help, but Mavis was speaking to an external service and was very, very stressed about the fact that she has COPD. Some of her cupboards she hasn't been in for a very long time. How was she going to get down on her hands and knees and empty her cupboards in order to have her kitchen replaced by her landlord? And that was causing Mavis high levels of stress. So Mavis is a persona, and you might see Judy in the background, and I think there were about 6 in all in our original exhibition, and we're gathering more. So personas, and I've written a blog which is on my LinkedIn, but we can share a link. Personas are a way of gathering or representing lots of people's lived experience in a kind of way that tells their story, but that can be used throughout a design process. So you can then go on to ideas and think, actually, would this work for Mavis? How would Mavis find out about this? And if you do your really amazing, direct, robust insight with customers, you know that Mavis represents a type of, or a kind of representation of a person and their difficulties, or their strengths and assets that have been represented or repeated in your research. So you can legitimately say, if this won't work for Mavis, it's not going to work for Mavis in 10 years. It's not going to work for Mavis tomorrow. We need to design something for Mavis. And if you have a diverse range of those personas, then you can use them to test what you do in the future. So we're using that insight. This slide is about finding creative ways to get people to connect with your agenda. And again, in big organizations, you know, my agenda around, can you help me prioritize and move forward some of these project streams, isn't everyone's agenda. Some, you know, people are really busy. So these are, we put all of our most kind of prioritized themes into a imaginary horse race. So these are the horses in the race. These are the living well horses in the race. And actually we redesigned how we described them so that people could connect with them and start to make judgments and discuss which horses had the best chance of winning the next race, which ones would they bring into their stable if they were looking to nurture and train this horse in order to get it to run faster. What do we need to do as an organisation if we were looking at horse number 62 to better improve our data? If it was in a race in a year, what would you do to train it better, faster, stronger? Who'd be in your training team? So we use it quite analogies and these things a lot to try and engage people. And this is Sam, one of our product development officers, who is prioritising her horses. So the ones that she would put her money on. I think you've skipped a slide. Oh no, you haven't. There's one before then, Jane. Sorry, the slide before that. And you'll see on the betting slip on the right hand side the kind of odds-on favourite and the outsider. So I always put money on the Grand National when I was a kid because that's what we did. Quite a lot. That was like an annual thing, and we were always allowed to put, like, you know, £1 on a favourite and £1 on one that was 100 to 1. And this is a way of helping people to recognise, actually, we think this one's a winner, we're going to drive it forward, but I really don't want to forget about this one over here. And I know that it might be tricky and it might be in the too hard pile, but there's something about this horse that I think we need to really bet some money on, because we don't want it to get lost. So lots of ways of getting people to think about the different, the massive big issues, actually, in a way that helps them connect so that they don't seem so overwhelming. Sorry, now you can move on, Jane. So something a little bit about technology. So very early on, I think there was a kind of influence on, we need to start a project that looks at technology, and we absolutely do. Need to be better at helping people to recognize that some technology can help them live their lives healthier and longer. We're looking at Internet of Things technology and new ways of supporting people to know when they've fallen over, and how do we get better at that technology, and how do we get better at intervening when that happens. A lot of people fall and they don't press their button, and then they might fall again and they don't. In fact, they only press it when they can't get back up. So how many times did they fall before that? And if we had technology that enabled us to understand that, then we would be able to prevent more serious falls, which, you know, saves massive amounts of money in lots of different areas, but also prevents that person losing their independence or not being able to now get on the bus, and lots of other life-limiting things. But in order to use that technology, you really have to understand Mavis's life, like, and people, and Mavis's need for technology and use of technology will be different to the person sat next to her. So she might really want something that will open and close her blinds, for instance, because she can no longer reach up and do that, but she doesn't want to change her blinds because she really likes them or she can't afford it. So that might be really great. But actually, that's a very personal thing. It doesn't mean we should put technology that opens and closes people blinds in every property that we have. And so technology it should be used as a tool, but only when we really understand the nature of someone's needs and aspirations in their life. And I think that's what makes technology seem like a cheap option, but actually can end up very expensive. And again, is only useful if the person that you're talking to really wants it, understands it, and will use it in the longer term. My granddad had dementia and he used Alexa. My dad put an Alexa, and he could say, "Alexa, play my music," and it played his music. And my grandma lived with my granddad, no dementia. She didn't use Alexa for anything else. They didn't think, oh, this is a good functionality, I wonder what else we could use it for. They only used it for that one function. My grandma's 92 and on Facebook. She's got an iPad. She knows how to click on the Facebook icon and she can scroll Facebook. She won't use the internet to order her prescriptions. She won't use the internet to order her shopping. She won't use the internet to order goods. She only uses the iPad with that one icon on for Facebook. So sometimes we make assumptions around capacity to use technology, motivation to use it, and confidence, that means that we think that if we have one solution, it might be okay for everyone. So a little bit of a reminder of the methodology around innovation at 13. So this is what we use to look at which ideas or which solutions are we going to drive forwards, but bearing in mind everything should be driven by the customer insight that we have based on solving actual problems that we understand. Beyond that, we have that little bubble in the middle, which if you're involved in innovation or design, this won't be new to you, but we have the feasibility stuff. So what can we do? Desirability, so what do the customers need or want? Again, that needs to be really important. And the viability, so can we afford it? Does it drive efficiencies, or will it make us money? Everything we do in the innovation team is collaborative and evidence-based, customer-focused, and we're very iterative. What that basically means is we can kind of just keep making it up and go, it's okay, we're being iterative. We thought we were doing this and now we're doing this thing over here, but that's totally fine. And bottom up, like I am the people with the most insight and the most experience and the most useful knowledge are often, sorry, Jane and Chris, are often not the people in senior management positions in organizations, because by nature they lose contact with customers. And I know that because I've worked in social care a long time, and it's a really hard thing to stay that connected to people's everyday lives. So you've got to go do the graft. And this is how we make decisions. So that orange bit in the middle is how we make decisions. And this is the sort of methodology that's guiding the Living Well project. There is a lot of evidence already about what supports people to live well for longer. There's huge amounts of research about loneliness, about transport, about mental health difficulties, about how older people can be supported, and how we should age healthy. But it's out there, but unless you can apply it to your geography and your local area, and unless you can align it to the customers or the audience in which you're working with, it just sits there as really nice evidence. So sometimes you have to test if that evidence is relevant to your customer group. And that's what I do. So I think I'm handing back over to Chris. Is that right? Yes.
Me, Jen. Can you hear me?
Oh, am I handing back over to you, Jane?
Yeah, it's me. Sorry.
Oh, fab. Sorry, Jane.
No, it's fine. I'm just going to summarise really. So, yeah, basically what you've heard from Chris about the context, from myself about our approach, and then Michelle in more detail about how we've started to tackle this at 13. As Chris has said, the white paper rightly puts a lot of emphasis on housing. We need to understand what more is going to come from that and how we can practically apply that to the Living Well project. It's a long-term task. This isn't a quick fix. There may be shorter things that we can do and things that we can pilot and prototype, but we're talking about a long-term agenda here. It's not just about how we deliver services now, that's absolutely a part of it, but it's also how we look at delivery of services in the future. And speaking and learning from those that are delivering and receiving services, so those that are living in our services, is key. I won't repeat about technology, because myself and Michelle have both mentioned that, but collaboration is absolutely key, and we are looking to work with like-minded people to tackle some of these issues and to develop solutions. So, you know, I would absolutely encourage you to come and speak to us, speak to Michelle, myself, Chris. Contact us on any of our channels, and I'll pop up at the end what they are. The geographical area, however, that you're designing for is massively important. So if you're watching this and you work in, you know, Buckinghamshire, then possibly we might not have the same agenda, but absolutely we can talk and share learning, and that's part of this process. And the key for to take away really is that there isn't a quick win, but that as we tackle this journey, we're really happy to share our learning and to collaborate with other organisations that are looking at this, because I'm sure it's on quite high on lots of people's agendas at the moment. So on that note, thank you all for listening. You can follow 13 on the 13 links there. We also have the HiLab page, which follows our innovation journey specifically, so you can follow us on there and on Twitter or on LinkedIn, and you can get in touch with us via those channels too, or feel free to ask Jeremy and pass on our contact details. And on that, I will stop sharing. The pressure of being the sharer was much more than I realised, especially when Michelle had little bits that come in at different times. But yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for your time.
Well, I think if you have been watching the chat box going during the course of the presentations, your presentations have been exceedingly well received, and we've also stimulated a selection of questions as well, which we'll go into in a minute. But what I really liked about the flow is about how you both looked at sort of like the real issues that address your localities, whether the impact of the national policy developments, and I would echo Chris's encouragement that we're really at the crest of something which could deliver something really meaningful, right through to how you as an organisation are adapting and really listening to customer voice and experience. And that sort of HiLab approach, that living lab, you know, it's not just today, it's a continual polling of information to support both the data, but provide those insights into those sort of decision-making processes to ultimately provide a better environment for your residents, your customers, both live well, but age well and stay well. So it links back to that preventative element. So no, really impressive. So thank you ever so much for sharing your lessons with us. And we look forward to promoting Michelle's blog next week. So thanks, Michelle, for drawing that to our attention. So I'm just going to sort of start through the questions, and please, if you've been stimulated to ask any questions, or if you put something in the chat box but have a more direct question to any of our three presenters, please do add that. Do add those now. I think we've got 3 or 4 already, which are great, and some real excellent questions. And I'm going to kick off with Sarah McKee, who's doing some fantastic work in Stockport and in the Northwest, and has done a lot of work thinking about how to build personal resilience. And she's really questioning about how do we signpost self-funders to access support structures that we talk about within a housing and care arena, and also are there any lessons we can learn from the pandemic as well? So I don't know who wants to, Michelle, is that for you to start off with, or Chris?
I think the self-funding issue came up in our research, Jeremy. So we spoke to a lady who was commissioned to support people to navigate into appropriate housing services, and she was commissioned by the local authority and then decommissioned very quickly, just because that's how it works sometimes when those roles appear. And she said that self-funders are an untapped, unsupported market. And that her experiences is that the social care services just like, well, you're self-funding, you can just go sort yourself out, you don't need my help. And actually those people are desperate for advice, support and information about appropriate housing, and just because they're funding it themselves doesn't mean that they are suddenly going to understand or be able to navigate what is quite a complex kind of housing language around sheltered, extra care, nursing home, care home, retirement home. Like the language isn't useful to people, and that's something else that we learned. So that we touched on it a little bit around self-funders, but I do think there was more work should be done to understand that market and that audience.
Well, let's come back to Chris.
Can I just add to that? Yeah, just add to that, Jeremy, because I think it is recognised in the white paper, isn't it, that this is a difficult landscape to navigate, and there's some funding going to be available to help people understand what's out there and how to get the best deal. So I think it's been recognised. Again, that's a really positive point. Another big piece of work we're doing at the moment is what we're calling our community resilience strategies, and that's working in kind of highlighted areas around how we can connect people to the voluntary sector, the third sector, to all the services that are available, and just providing that kind of signposting. So something like that applied to care and health and support could be a way forward. It's not the real answer, because I think, as Michelle said, they are kind of left to their own devices. But I think we need to, again, push on that navigator role and how we can help that with that, and how we can help design services around that.
Yes, I think that point sort of also comes up with, I think, what you and Jane talked about, the role of the handy person as well. So it's not just about the to-do for, it's also about what empowerments can we offer through information and advice services as well, and how holistically. And again, I think that came across really well in your presentation. It's a holistic approach, not just a crisis intervention that you're working on. Jane, did you have any comments you wanted to come back on that first question about the pandemic, or anything else around self-funders?
I think in terms of the pandemic, it's really interesting because we have some different perspectives. So Michelle and I, for example, had a different perspective on the impact that might have had digitally on older customers. From my perspective, I felt that it might have got customers more digitally engaged. Michelle wasn't sure.
The evidence, I have evidence now that suggests that they're not. That the digital divide is bigger. The digital divide is bigger after COVID, not smaller. It's interesting though. But there is a lot of people who are like, well, COVID's fixed it. But it's made the digital divide bigger. But
yeah,
I mean,
there's a piece of work that we're looking at around kind of that digital exclusion / digital inclusion, and that's come from this Living Well research. So it's very interesting because everybody has different perspectives on the impact of the pandemic. I think one of the natural impacts has been, and this might actually be answering slightly another question in the Q&A, but one of the other impacts has been that it's been much more difficult to engage with our customers directly at all. So especially a customer base that isn't necessarily as digitally included. The way that we've engaged with customers for almost the past 2 years has been like this, on Teams or on, so trying to capture the right insights from people, and that's where we have more work to do in terms of going out and physically speaking to people, has been really difficult. And I think that's been a big challenge for this project, doing it throughout the pandemic.
Well, look, let's continue on this vein, because I think not necessarily on the pandemic, but there are quite a few questions that are really about how you as an organisation have been engaging. And both Julia Ashley, who's been asking particularly around the engagement with health and social care, Sue Weston, who's talking about engaging with those missing residents, and Gemma, who's talking about, what plans have you got as this progresses. So I don't know if you can see the questions. If we could start off perhaps with Julia first. And I know Julia's organisation, Central and Cecil, have done a lot of work addressing issues around digital exclusion and addressing loneliness and isolation that people experience through the pandemic. But Michelle, do you have any issues around that you, or any of you have got any sort of issues that, or sort of key learning points that come through engaging with health and social care colleagues?
My learning is, that's my background. So I had existing relationships across health and social care services that I relied upon to go, can I please speak to your frontline staff? Please, can I just have 15 minutes in your falls prevention partnership? Can I just chat to people? And it was all, obviously at that time, because this was last year, it was all remote engagement. We use online technology called Mural, which enables people to access and write post-it notes. We asked questions that had come up through that we were trying to answer. So and took people on little journeys remotely so that they could answer questions in a particular order that elicited a kind of story from them about the picture. Everyone had a little different piece of the picture, So if we looked at what are we trying to answer and who has the what we're trying to understand and who has the answers. So sometimes that was someone with a lot of experience in innovating around loneliness. Sometimes it was actually, let's go ask the assertive outreach workers from Middlesbrough and Stockton Mind, because we know that they're, and then we connected with telephone befrienders, the volunteer support worker of telephone befrienders. We spoke to the lady who runs all of the volunteer and therapeutic support in James Cook Hospital, so anyone who comes into James Cook who has additional needs, like where they need support to either be in hospital or they're on a dementia ward and they've got mental health difficulties. We spoke to her about trends and impact and those things. And then we synthesize that, so we theme it, so where more than one person has said more than one thing, and you kind of then start to see a picture which you can try and use to describe to people so that they can help you make decisions. So lots of different ways, but mainly relationships, like actual relationships with people, was what I used, that requires you just to kind of put lots of time and energy in.
Yeah, and at a time also when these health and social care economies themselves are under a lot of pressure, and I think Chris and Jane both talked about the integration agenda. I'm just wondering whether you had any other insights locally or indeed regionally, because I think you'll be part of the integrated care system, which addresses probably about 25 local authority areas, so probably the largest ICS in the country. And any thoughts about those relationships? So not just the individual hospital discharge coordinator or the district nurse, but at a senior level in terms of changing some of that culture?
Yeah, we're connected to all those big structures, and the ICS in the North East region is massive. It covers a massive geography. We're on health and wellbeing boards. We connect at the highest level in local authorities. But what I find in the years of trying to do this is it's hard. It's really, really difficult to get those relationships going, and it tends to be around a project or a scheme or whatever, and people can coalesce around that and see that. But then it's the shame of that is it's not scaled up. It's not repeated. It's the kind of big one-offs. So I think there's a long way to go. It kind of disappoints me in some ways, but I think it's just everybody's got their different priorities and everybody speaks that different language. So I think hopefully the white paper and then the following white paper on integration is going to give a bit more insight into that, and I think have a bit more push on that, because just by bringing a new structure together isn't going to solve all the issues. There's got to be a lot of work done with the various organisations to have that shared vision and that that working towards that, because it's not an overnight fix either.
I'm going to come on to sorry, Jane, did I see you wanted to say something, or? Because you may also have an answer to Sue's question about engaging with missing residents. I think, again, Michelle, you talked about the missing voices. And just as an aside, on Thursday is the launch of the University of Bristol and International Longevity Centre report called the DICE Project, which is looking at different issues around diversity in care environments and social exclusion. So there's an interesting new research report coming out this week. But any thoughts about the missing residents as well? So perhaps people who are excluded.
Yeah, I think that there's two sides to that. Like you say, it's the diversity within our schemes, but also the customers that just don't necessarily want to engage in this type of project, and it's or they don't either have the time, the inclination, the motivation, for whatever reason that they haven't spoken to us yet. And as I say, our sample at the moment is limited because of the timing that we've had and the pandemic. So we've definitely, I know Michelle's already, we've actually spoken today about going out and speaking to more customers and how we capture that. But it is a really difficult one to crack. Hopefully, I mean, I think I've said this about 50 times, Jeremy, but the world is opening up again. And so that should make our jobs a lot easier. But in terms of capturing that missing market, Michelle's team are doing some work around that anyway. So I don't know if you want to talk a bit about that, Michelle.
Well, I think there's sort of two strands to it. There's the seldom heard. I mean, sometimes people are called hard to reach, but they're not so hard to reach, i.e. they're just there in their homes. It's not, do you know what I mean? Like they're usually connected to someone in a community, to someone, and so it just takes a little bit more work to kind of find people, and you have to know why you're looking for them and what it is you would like to learn from them first. And so we have to map who is missing actually from our research and who has the answers to some of the questions and where might we find them. You can call upon the third sector quite often because they often have the biggest reach into marginalised communities. But then we're using a data approach to look at the customers who are missing from 13, which is with a slightly different driver, which is around growth. So how do we compare our existing data set of customers and their demographic and their geography to who we would expect to have who are in our communities based on Acorn data, or other people might have heard of Mosaic. And if you do that compare and contrast, you can identify key communities that are maybe sitting around where our stock is, where we would expect actually them, maybe they could be, or we might have an offer for them. And then we look at going out and speaking to those customers in a targeted way to understand, do they know about us? Are they interested in what we have to offer? Did they consider us as a housing provider? And one of those key target markets is older people. So that kind of market around older people who are possibly asset rich and cash poor. So living in houses that might be too big for them, sitting around the areas in which we have stock, and then looking at, have they considered us as a potential future housing provider, and what are their lives like? So that's a longer piece of work that's kind of similar, but not this. In terms of finding those missing voices, it's targeted, specific, well-planned work where you need a really kind of succinct plan about who you're looking to speak to and how you're going to find them, and then how you're going to make that conversation meaningful. I could talk about that all day long because it's a proper passion of mine, is exclusion, but I'm not going to continue.
Well, Michelle, thanks for whetting our appetite as well. But Gemma Jolly does ask a bit about what plans do you have for continued engagement. I think you partially answered that. From what I can gather, this is implicit in what 13 are taking forward. So while it is part of your role, it actually, what I really like about what I've heard, it's crossed the organisation, and more importantly, it's about how you've continued to engage with residents and customers, so that feeds in continually, as opposed to being a one-off transaction, so to speak. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I think people are scared. In my experience, people are a bit scared of customer co-design or co-production with customers, because they think that they have to find people who are prepared to come to 10 workshops and sit on a board and, you know, agree some terms of reference and make some decisions, and then they're going to want to be on the commissioning panel, and they're going to want to score the specification, and all you get into all of that. In my experience, actually, if you spend an hour with someone and that's a meaningful, positive experience for them, and you listen and you validate their experiences, and you are open to their opinions, that intervention in itself is very meaningful for people, and they often don't have expectations that you're going to then involve them in the governance process in your organisation, or that they're automatically going to get to make a decision about the end result. Often that intervention itself is very meaningful and therapeutic for someone. So if you can get that bit right, you don't always have to be mega concerned about keeping 300 people all involved in a process. Often they filter themselves out naturally. And if they want to stay involved, you can keep them up to date, or you could invite them if they're able to come to different activity. But it's an offer, but rather than an expectation. And in my experience, you might speak to 50 people and 5 of them might want to stay involved, and that's manageable.
Yeah, no, and I think what you've demonstrated this afternoon is your sort of approach corporately, if I can say that, to building that capacity first, so then you can then engage. And I don't know if that, again, if there's anything on that, Jane or Chris, that you'd like to come back on.
I'll start, and then Jane, you can continue. But yeah, it's part of the bigger strategy, because we can do what we can do and engage our customers and do as much as we can do around that. But a lot of this money that's going to become available is going to come through local authorities and health trusts. So it's engaging with those organisations around the right structures, so we can put the best case forward in terms of what we can do to help them. I think because of years of austerity and then years now with COVID, it's kind of reduced capacity of organisations to think ahead. And I think this project is giving us the space and the time to be able to do a little bit of that thinking for us, but certainly for them as well. So it's how we can get that message out, and how we can engage more meaningfully with those organisations, so we can get something developed. And it won't be every organisation. We'll work with the ones who get it and understand it and want to kind of develop as well. So that is absolutely part of the whole strategy. Do you want to add to that, Jane?
I would just say that, and on that, we don't have the full answer to that yet. That's one of the problems that we're trying to tackle through this, is what's the best way to engage with people? What are the things that we want to co-design? Who are we going to co-design with? And that, as I mentioned at the end of the presentation there, we are looking for like-minded people who can go forward on this journey with us. This isn't about us doing 2 or 13 fixing all of the world's problems in terms of living well. It's about the things we've got control over, the things we can influence, and then the people that we need to collaborate with in order to move the agenda forward for the benefit of everybody, really, because it'll benefit our customers, it will benefit the public purse, and it'll benefit, you know, us financially. So there's a sound business case for that collaboration that we keep talking about, but we don't have the answers to all of that at the moment.
And just picking up on that, and I think you also have talked about co-production or partnership working in a way. One of the things that I've heard through this session is about that engagement with the third sector and volunteers. And Maggie, in her question, asked, do you have a volunteer bureau in the communities that you operate in? Whether that presumably could be a CVS or VS, Voluntary Service Council, or other form of voluntary and third sector organisations that you sort of link in with.
Yes, I don't know if you want me to answer that.
Well, would you want to kick off?
Stuff, just yes, we do have third sector VCS organisations. The third sector across the board struggles to engage skilled, experienced volunteers who are able to deliver on these sorts of agendas. A lot, and it's a lot to do with the geography and the capacity of people. It's not that people don't want to volunteer, but it's an expensive, resource-intensive way of having people support each other. It works really well where you have a lot of retired professionals with a lot of social capital. Works less well in communities where you don't have, people don't have, it's not that they don't have strengths back to offer, and I'm not in any way saying that people who are living in some of our communities have nothing back to offer, but often the gap between them and a volunteering opportunity that would enable them to give something back to an older vulnerable person in their area, the gap is bigger, and that requires more intervention. In my experience, in terms of volunteering, it feels like a really good option, but in reality it's complex, I think, and the reason why we just don't have a big vat of volunteers ready to come and help in the local area, at least in Teesside. I don't think that's the case in some of the other areas we operate in.
So in a sense, it probably needs some sort of audit of what the capacity is in those localities around the third sector, because I think what Maggie also highlights, what I quite like, is the opportunity also to think about intergenerational volunteering as well, and that might link back to some of those opening comments that you made around working closely in multi-generational and intergenerational approaches. And I'm just wondering whether you've got experience of schemes where you're already doing that, you know, working with local schools, or I think you've got an FE college near your head office. You know, how do you engage with the colleges locally?
We do a lot of that work in communities on not just this topic, but a whole range of kind of community-based initiatives, and we've got a load of stuff going on. And I think sometimes we've got people who are volunteers who just don't realise it. They do a lot of work in the communities, and as I said, mentioned earlier, the community resilience strategy is drawing all that out in terms of what's out there and how can we connect people to what's out there. So I think rather than reinvent the wheel and start everything again, it's about understanding what's out there. But we do loads of work with lots of different organisations. We've got a really strong and well developed memorandum of understanding with Teesside University and how we work with the student cohort there around volunteering or understanding what 13 does, or helping us to look at what the what services potential customers might want if the graduates and coming out of university, etc. So we try to tackle all of that in the partnerships and the communities that we work in. We can always do more, but I think we've got a really solid foundation because of just the geography that we work in and the kind of numbers of stock that we've got in an area. It's kind of expected that we do this stuff. It's really important.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful, Chris. And I think you mentioned right at the outset that broader approach around working in communities, and that could be a session in its own right. I think we're putting the spotlight more on living well. The two other questions I want to sort of just conclude on. The first is from Paul, who I think asks a real important issue about the use of language. And he suggests that some of this currently is rooted in services, customers, delivery, and profitability. And I think he's really sort of getting at: is there a range of language and the narrative that we use around greater resident participation and support? And I just wonder, a strengths-based approach in effect. So is there anything that you think that are coming through that in terms of both the stakeholder engagement, but also you as an organisation, about how you communicate with your customers and residents?
I think from Chris has already referenced a couple of times. I've just read the question and around our community resilience strategy, that this will absolutely longer term link in with that, and that community resilience strategy is around what are the strengths of our customers, what are the strengths of those communities, how do we support them to be as resilient as possible. So it's not us delivering services to, although there's absolutely always going to be a need for certain services to be delivered to, but it's around how can we build on the strengths of those communities to make them as resilient as possible. And that's something that also sits within, Chris is our Executive Director of Business Growth, and it sits within that, so we work very closely with our colleagues across the business. But there will initially be areas that we need to design new things, and so when we need to design new things, people will naturally need more support at first and then move into that kind of longer term resilience strategy.
Excellent. Another question has just snuck in, which I'm going to just check we've got a little bit of time, about local area coordination, and I'm afraid I can't say who it's from. There's like a telephone number that I've been given here, but it's, do you link with local area coordinators, or are you aware through your research, Michelle, of lacks in other areas and how they sort of bridge the sort of statutory and public sector?
We had lacks.
Yeah.
I don't know if they were delivered by 13. We had lacks in Middlesbrough. My background's worked in Middlesbrough and Stockton, which is the 20 years of my career. We had lacks, and then they were they didn't stay around. We have a very well-resourced social prescribing service across South Tees and North Tees, who are similar, but they're attached to particular GP cohorts and the areas around those GP practices. So we don't have local area coordination in that way, or community connectors, or there's loads of language around those types of people, often run by the third sector, or sometimes I think the LACs were local authorities.
Yeah,
back in the day.
It
was people like, oh, it was brilliant. It was a brilliant model. I remember them. It was brilliant. And then it stopped, and then it gets lost, doesn't it? And then somehow we end up back in locality-based work, in which our local authority, Middlesbrough local authority, was picking back up. So we have similar types of things, but we don't have any lacks. I know the social prescribers who were there to do the community connector role, their caseloads are just full of high levels of complexity. Just like they can't do low-level signposting and support because there's just so much need in communities. And we have, like, I don't know, there's waiting lists for everything that you might need support for locally. So mental health support and physio support, anything you might need is just a waiting list for. People can't get access to their GP. So what that means is stuff like community connecting goes down people's priority list because they need their basic needs met. And so at least in Teesside, those services are overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And that stops them doing what they were originally commissioned to
But
deliver.
I think what you do hint at is that actually those types of community connectors, circles of communities, are all really important part of this tapestry of collaborative working, and how you use it, work closely for stakeholder engagement, but also fully participate in sort of the local decision making. It's something that the LIN is very interested in, and developing our concept of collaborate, and we have a whole section on community connectors in our directory of community connectivity activities.
Resource intensive though. It's like you need, you know, if people, you need people to do that, and to have the time and energy to do it, and it's stuff that's not it's not as easy to get funded now as it used to be, I don't think so. And that's what some of the stuff that I think Chris was saying, which is like how much of this stuff we're doing loads as a housing association, but actually there's still so much more to do. There would still we would continue to just be always delivering, and it's not, we need to work with other people who can fill those gaps, and I think that it's, otherwise you end up trying to fill them yourself as an organisation, because there's high levels of need for
absolutely support. I'm going to finish with Tony's question, because he's actually really asked a very pertinent question, which is possibly linked to the way you're looking at data collection to inform some of the metrics, both in terms of demonstrating the social impact, but also the sort of return on investment in here in terms of the whole system. And he says, could we please focus on the proposals for an action plan? And I'm just wondering whether you've thought about some of the points that he's raised in you know, the reduction in terms of hospital admissions, a number of people going into care homes. Have you looked at that in terms of how the type of support networks that you're creating, and the reason why you see aging and living well is so important, and in terms of your relationships that you have with the local communities?
We've got loads of evidence around the impact of the schemes or the services that we deliver have on, but it's everybody else's budget. It's not, you know, it's not 13's. This costs 13 money at times. But I think it's important to understand to the overall public purse what that impact is. But then it's the life story, the case studies as well, because it's not about the money. It's not about that for us. It's about the social value. So we can demonstrate that ad nauseum, because that's what we look at. But I think in terms of the new ITS structures or whatever that comes through, for me, what Tony set out there is kind of the agenda for that, you know, for that structure. Because until we get a common vision about what this needs to do, and a common set of measures, because everyone's different, then I think we'll you know, we won't take it forward. We won't use all the advantages of what's in front of us. So it's about that common set of goals, ambitions, and then measure that in terms of what's been achieved. But we know what you know, what contributes to that kind of better living, better, longer living, more independent. I think it's just sharing that with everybody else and making sure that everyone is on the same page effectively.
Well, we'd love to come back and discuss this again with you, perhaps in a year's time, to see how things have developed. But Jane and Michelle, any final words before I sort of sum up?
I think I've said loads, Jeremy.
Shut up. Jane?
No, just that. I mean, the comments I've tried to, whilst we've been have a quick chat, but the chat's been really positive. So hopefully it's been useful for people. They've spent a good chunk of an hour of their time listening. So hopefully we've been able to provide some insightful information.
Well, I mean, again, on behalf of the HousingLIN, thank you very much for all three of you for presenting. It's, as you've highlighted, it's been very positively received. People really asked some very pertinent, really direct questions, which I think you've all explained and answered really well. For me, you know, this is a happy hour. What you've talked about is fundamental to the HAPPI principles, but also you've drawn attention to the digital as well, which links into some of the work we've been doing to think about where technology plays and what we call HAPPI. And we're looking forward to rolling a HAPPI out. But on behalf of the LIN, once again, thanks very much for all your presentations. One of the themes that's come through is an area that we're going to address more in detail in 2 weeks' time at our next happy hour. And each of you touched on social prescription. We're working closely with the team at the National Academy for Social Prescribing, and we're going to be looking at some of the issues that they're highlighting from their work, as well as drawing attention to the work that Stonewater Housing Association and Bromford have been looking at, and also some work coming through from Manchester. And again, there was somebody from Manchester posted some information about how they're working within communities in Manchester. So if you're interested in social prescribing, please join us again. But I'm really delightful that you were able to join us. Can I thank the team behind the scenes for your support, and the recording and the slides along with Michelle's blog will be available in due course. So thank you and have a really great afternoon and evening.
Thank you.
Bye everybody.
Bye.